Over the years, I've had a more than fair curiosity around something weird video. When I first heard of them in the mid-2000s, their website was akin to the chocolate room in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory to me. There were pages upon pages of some of the most bizarre, weird and low-budget trash, exploitation and pornography that money could buy. The only problem at the time was that their website was also a massive hunk of junk that hadn't been refreshed in at least 10 years by the time I found it, and seemingly had been built with only the US in mind. I say this because when I tried to place a reasonably large order with them back in 2009, they wouldn't let me select a country for shipping, and when I contacted them directly, I got an email back from a member of their sales team saying the website didn't support international shipping, but that if I sent him a list of the films that I wanted alongside all my debit card information on an email, they'd maybe possibly see if they could hook me up. I did not purchase anything off them, dear viewer. Hell, even when I tried again in 2017, when the site had had a refresh, they still hadn't got it quite right. Now offering international shipping, but with a $17 shipping fee per item, with no option to combine. A problem they seemingly still have to this day. Indeed, it seemed like the world of something weird video would always be perilously out of grasp. That is, until quite recently, when boutique label and seemingly the chillest company currently in the game, the AGFA, started distributing some of Something Weird's back catalogue in glorious HD scans with rafts of extras and some really solid looking packaging. I, of course, took the opportunity to clean them out of almost everything they released last Black Friday. And today, I want to take a look at one of the films that I picked up in the haul, 1967's She-Freak. This one's interesting because, how do I put this diplomatically? It doesn't outright steal the plot of Todd Browning's Freaks, but it pretty much steals a more than decent chunk of the key beats and structure from it and marries it up to more modernised film techniques and narratives with a decent veneer of trash and exploitation to boot. The film follows Jade, a waitress in a dive cafe in the middle of nowhere with large aspirations. She doesn't want to end up like her mother, who was apparently destitute at the time Jade last saw her years ago, having been used up by society and left to wither away in a hovel. No, Jade's got a vision. She wants cars, money, fine clothes and food, and she's willing to lie, cheat, steal and even murder to get it. Jade has only contempt for her current place in life. Her boss is a married man who hits on her semi-regularly and keeps trying to make it with her. The customers are yokels who also constantly hit on her and don't treat her with any respect, and Jade's not really in any position to challenge this. That is, until now, where our film picks up, as a travelling businessman called Ben comes into the restaurant. Ben's been scouting out cafes and restaurants in the city to put up posters advertising a circus that's coming to town in a few days, and he's stopped by the cafe for a bite to eat, a cup of coffee, and to ask if he can put a flyer up in their window. The boss gives the thumbs up, and Jade is smitten with the look of the circus and stops Ben before he leaves to ask if there's any work going at the fair. Ben says he doesn't know if anything's available, but he tells Jade to head down to the circus when it gets into town, hunt down the owner called Al, and tell him that Ben sent her. The boss isn't too happy with the idea that Jade's just tried to solicit work off a customer while he was literally standing next to her, and after a heated exchange, he fires her with one of the best lines I've heard in a good while. "Get out of here, you carnival tramp." Jade's feeling a bit down, but it doesn't take long for things to pick up. When she heads to the carnival, she finds Al and manages to swing a job waiting tables in the food court. After a few days, she eventually bumps into Moon, a lady working as an exotic dancer at the fair who takes a real shining to Jade. She offers to let her stay in the motel she's renting and shows her the ropes of the fair. She also warns her to stay away from the ride runners if she knows what's good for her, particularly the Ferris wheel operator Blackie, who's nothing but trouble. After a bit more bussing, Jade's allowed to go on a break and she decides to take in the sights and sounds of the carnival, including a trip to the Freaks tent. And, after spending a decent amount of time in there, she leaves terrified, disgusted and shaken. That night, she heads back to the motel, where she vents to Moon about how awful the Freaks were. Moon shares her story with Jade, and Jade starts probing Moon about eligible bachelors at the fair. Most of them are either drunks, punks, or ancient. But Moon mentions in passing a certain Mr. Steve St. John. His wife's dead, no children, a house in Tampa, he has his own car, a nice car, and he's making decent money. The only hang-up is, he's the owner and manager of the Freak Tent. Jade's not too fussed about that though, and almost immediately sets to work trying to seduce, bed, and marry Mr. St. John. By any means necessary. And the plan works. It's not too long before the pair are going steady and Jade's well on the way to becoming Mrs. St. John. But trouble isn't too far away from Jade, as Blackie starts getting a little too intense for Jade to resist, and before we know it, wedding bells are ringing and Jade's having a full-on affair with Blackie while draining Steve's bank account. But while all this is going on, the freaks are keeping an eye on Jade. They don't want to see their boss get hurt and, well, if you've seen the original Freaks, you'll know what's coming from a mile away with this one. But if you want a pretty decent slice of trashy 60s exploitation goodness, well, I think She-Freak may well be the movie you need in your life. If I'm being honest, the script for this film is probably its weakest element. Not only is the work largely derivative of Todd Brownings' 1932 classic Freaks, i.e. a no-good woman seeks to manipulate a wealthy man into marrying her so she can leech off him while being unfaithful, but I don't personally feel this film handles that story anywhere near as subtly as Todd Brownings' original. The film this film is based on had complex characters, had socio-political issues embedded throughout. It made the people in the Freak Show feel like developed characters with feelings, drives, urges, passions, fears, feelings. It made them feel like people who through sheer misfortune had ended up being shunned by society. And because Freaks spends so long establishing its characters, their motivations, what drives them, it makes what happens to them all the more powerful and effective. This film doesn't do that. Instead, we spend most of the film with Jade, whose motivations, while clearly outlined at multiple points, aren't really clearly shown. We're told that Jade's main motivation is money and status repeatedly, but what we're shown is just a woman who's out to try and have an easy life, who's caught in something resembling a love triangle. The titular freaks are largely absent from this film. There's a cowboy dwarf called Shorty, who's a main player in the second and third acts, but he's the only character to get anything more than a blink and you'll miss it appearance in the various circus and fair montages. And I think that really hurts this movie in terms of investment. Mild spoilers, but apart from Shorty in the circus montages, none of the other freaks turn up in this movie until about 2 minutes from the end of the film. And because we as an audience are kept away from them for most of the runtime, when they do turn up it doesn't really mean anything. The end of Freaks is a harrowing and gut-wrenching experience because we've spent the past hour getting to know these characters in detail, so when they go after the main antagonist in the final act, we know it's not a decision made lightly and that these are human beings who've been pushed well beyond their breaking point. In She-Freak, we don't get that connection. They just turn up at the end and do nasty shit, and as a result, I don't feel invested in these characters. I know I don't like Jade by the end of this movie, but why these characters hate her to the point of taking out violent vengeance is blown way out of proportion, really. There's just no build-up, so the payoff falls flat. While I appreciate the modernisations that this film's done to the plot, setting Jade up as a waitress in a dive diner, having an affair with a Ferris wheel operator rather than a strong man, and giving her good friends like Moon, the film also shoots itself in the foot with some of these modernisations. The biggest problem being its total and unending inclusion of circus montages and padding. Don't get me wrong, if I'd bought this film exclusively for montages of circus and fairground footage from the 1950s and 60s, I'd have felt like it was money well spent. But I came here to see an exploitation film loosely tied to Todd Browning's Freaks about a waitress who flees to the circus to try and bag a money man and who, as a result of being manipulative and cruel, ends up becoming as ugly on the outside as she is on the inside. But the film can't ever fully deliver on that experience because a not insignificant portion of the film is dedicated to montages of the fairground being set up or taken down, shots of people enjoying the circus, and at multiple points throughout the film they'll just have Jade walk around the fairground aimlessly and try a few rides. With those scenes shortened or removed, you'd probably be looking at a 35 to 55 minute film, tops. And with the montage footage and the padding being as prominent as it is, the film constantly stops and starts from a narrative perspective, and it can be really difficult to keep your attention on things. I also feel they fumbled the ball a bit on the exploitation front. This was an opportunity to really give a story like this a bit of grit, to give it the blood, guts and boobs treatment that the original was prohibited to go anywhere near. But this film barely breaks any new ground. A couple of slightly bloody shots of a stabbing, an impaled hand and a woman in a bikini is about as brash as it gets, with the rest of the film largely being set either in motel rooms or the food court. I don't know, I guess I went into this expecting more. I was hoping for a border grindhousey experience, and it's really more of an advert for a travelling circus than it is a movie. That was another personal disappointment as well. Going into this, I knew it was loosely based on Freaks, but I went in with the mindset that maybe it was going to be used more as a springboard rather than an anchor. In particular, I was expecting them to use the titular she-freak more. I don't know, in my mind I thought maybe she'd appear about 2/3 of the way in, with the rest of the movie being some kind of subversion of Todd Browning's original works. I mean, the film's called She-Freak. She's shown prominently on all the posters, the box art for the film, she's in the trailer a few times. You know, it wouldn't be unreasonable to assume she'd actually be in the movie. She's in it for about 30 seconds, right at the very, very end of the film. And that really took the wind out of my sails because I so wanted to see something unique, and I came away a bit disappointed as a result. So, the pacing's a bit off, there's an ungodly amount of padding, the characters are all a bit underdeveloped apart from maybe Jade, the she-freak is only actually in the movie for 30-ish seconds, and if it is to be perceived as a modernised remake, the original in my opinion handles its material better. But there is one area where She-Freak thrashes the original Freaks hands down, and that's the dialogue. There are some wonderful lines in this thing. Everyone's speaking like 50s noir detectives for the most part. It's fast-paced, largely metaphoric, and full of quotable moments. The cast really get into their lines as well, delivering most of them with an absolute fluid perfection that really did keep my attention. Particularly when things start heating up as more people start to realise Jade may have ulterior motives. So while the actual narrative and structure may be a lesser experience, at least you've got some top-tier dialogue to help keep things relatively sweet. The script was written by David F. Friedman and Michael B. Drucksmann. Michael has 12 writing credits, his last was in 2004, and there's a whopping 23 years between this film and his next credit. It's a rather infamous list of titles in terms of trash and schlock, but for my money, I'd say this film, Keaton's Cop and Raptor were definite highlights of his career. David F. Friedman is a bit of an icon of the trash cinema world, with 20 writing credits to his name including Blood Feast and The Defilers, alongside a plethora of erotic softcore and bordering on hardcore features. In fact, I recently reviewed one on this channel. That's Sexploitation, which was also unfortunately his last credit, as he sadly passed away in 2011 at the age of 87. The film was directed by Byron Mabe. He has 12 directing credits including The Acid Eaters and Space Thing. I'd say these and this film were probably his best known works. His last film was in 1980 and he sadly passed away in 2001 at the age of 69. There is also one other person I'd like to quickly mention at this point as well, and that's one Don Davison. Don was a bit of a grifter, and shortly after She-Freak came out, he was able to get his hands on a print, which he then inserted approximately 8 minutes of completely unrelated red-blue 3D footage into the film. He retitled it Asylum of the Insane and toured the southern states of America with it, making a very tidy profit in the process. When David F. Friedman found out, he got in touch with Don to start legal proceedings, but ultimately let him off the hook, as David wasn't exactly a squeaky clean character himself. On the direction front, we actually have a pretty genuinely lovely experience. Byron's work really shines where it counts, and even though the circus footage is totally overused, it is incredibly effective at pulling you into that fairground vibe. By the halfway point, I genuinely had a hankering to go to a circus, something I hadn't thought about doing for literal decades at this point. And this, combined with some really distinct studio shots and some very subtle use of coloured lighting gels, chiaroscuro lighting, and some more experimental shots to help keep the audience alive and kicking, I thought was quite a welcome experience to sit through. The only thing that does rather put a dampener on the direction and cine really is the editing. Unfortunately, this thing looks like it's being cut on a meat slicer. Shots will often cut too soon or too late, shot changes are imprecise and lack focus, and the entire assembly comes across as a little bit slapdash, with the main aim seemingly being to get it out the door rather than delivered as a coherent production. Which I feel is a shame, as I feel with just a little bit more TLC on this front, that direction and cine would have been able to pop way more than it does here. On the cine front, it's nice. Really nice. There's a more than decent range of shot types on display here. As mentioned, the lighting and experimentation really help pull this production up, and when filming the fairground scenes, there appears to have been a real emphasis on vibrant block colours. It really feels like the camera crew properly took the time to scope out the circus to see what would look decent in a montage. The night shoots are handled well too. They're not overly dark, there's a decent amount of noise, but not so much that it overwhelms the picture. And they use natural lighting very effectively to get the best out of the cast. All in all, while I won't say this is the prettiest film I've ever sat through, for trash cinema, it's definitely up there. Performance-wise, this is effectively the Claire Brennan show. She is an absolute storm in this movie, and really does go all in on the woman looking to get what she wants performance that a script like this absolutely requires. She's positively venomous in places through this, but gets more than a decent chance to really dig her teeth into a meaty role that takes her through a full range of emotions at one point or another. She's simply fab, and I was astounded to read that she sadly died of cancer only 10 years after this film was made at the age of 43. Lynn Courtney has a more than decent turn as Moon in this, playing the supportive friend who ultimately realises she's let herself in for way more than she bargained for. I kinda wish she had more to do in this movie really, because apart from info dumping to Jade periodically whenever the script needs to quickly push things along, she more or less ends up being a bit of an eye candy role. Which is a shame really, because the times she does get to shine are really quite decent. The same can also be said for Lee Raymond as Blackie. A true malevolent presence. He brings a genuine menace to the role that I seldom see in movies like this. Oliver Reed termed this kind of performance, well, he described it as being a whispering giant. And I think that Raymond's really channeling that element here. He's quiet, but you better believe he will get what he wants, and he isn't above murder to get it. A great performance that I for one shan't soon forget. And finally, the soundtrack. Not much to say here honestly, it's a mixture of 50s and 60s rock and roll combined with some fairly early poppy synth work. They're very high quality recordings and sound really nice, but the problem is, I don't really feel they suit the tone of this film. They feel painfully out of place during the montages, and when they're used during key emotive scenes, they don't seem to set the tone well at all. Maybe if this was some kind of Grease, Animal House type production, the music would have sat better. But for this film, it kind of feels like they just slapped on what they had licenses for rather than actually choosing their score in a considered fashion, which is a bit of a shame. She-Freak was released on VHS in the UK by AVR Home Entertainment. It was released as the first tape in the Tales of Terror collection, and I'm having a real problem nailing a date down for when this came out. The only date I can find online is a post claiming it came out in 1999, which, judging by the artwork, the labels, and the fact that DVDs were well in fashion at this point, I just can't see this being a 99 release. If I were to have an educated guess, I'd probably put it somewhere between 1990 and 1995, but if you know when this came out on VHS in the UK, do let me know in the comments. It would later receive a DVD release by a company called 23rd Century in either 2003 or 2004, again the dates are a little sketchy on that one. Something Weird would also release a version under their own label in the US, and from what I can see, if you could pick a version, the official Something Weird version would be the one you'd go for, just simply for the better PQ. Finally, in 2021, AGFA in partnership with Something Weird released a frankly stunning Blu-ray. One of the most solid releases to date. complete with a full remaster of the print that looks simply delightful, and a raft of extras including, but not limited to, the Don Davison inserts, a commentary with David F. Friedman, and a full hour-and-a-half of trailers for other David F. Friedman movies. Not to mention nearly 10 minutes of carnival and circus footage from the 1930s to the 1950s, all wrapped up in a gorgeous package that contains a detailed booklet covering the film's history, some stellar artwork, and I personally went for the slipcase release, which it's some of my favourite artwork I own for a movie release. It's gorgeous. Ultimately, She-Freak is a passable watching experience. The script's a bit weak in my opinion and really needed a bit more oomph to get it over the line. The editing really lets this film down, as does the score that doesn't really fit the bill, but offsetting that you have some gorgeous Cinean direction and a cast that well and truly embrace the roles and give it one hell of a decent stab. Throw in some really corny but enjoyable dialogue and a few effect shots towards the end that loot the business, and while it is a bit patchy, I think there's certainly stuff to love in this. A film that would probably pair up well with Freakmaker, The Mutations. If you're looking for something a bit different or have a hankering for corn dogs, tilt-a-whirls and freak shows, maybe go and check out She-Freak. A more than decent watch for a rainy afternoon.